Hello everyone, I'm Mark Baines, the Executive Director for Training Made Fun, as well as a professor at Concordia University in Irvine for kinesiology. And today we're going to be talking about program design. And when we talk about program design, this is the first section of the presentation on program design. And we're talking about specifically how to design safer, more efficient, more effective programs for the general population or people of variable interests or needs. And as we have more specific athletic performance needs, we're going to be a little more specialized when we talk about this. This is meant to be very general, however, very, very important that is taken into account in the training of all individuals, regardless of goal. And that said, some important parameters to consider first. When we talk about program design as a whole, the American College of Sports Medicine did a very good job of defining fitness in three basic categories: health-related fitness, skill-related fitness, and physiological fitness. And first and foremost, we have to be thinking about health. Health and athletic performance are not necessarily the same thing by any means. And health and fitness aren't exactly the same thing. You can be healthy and not fit. You really can't be fully fit without being healthy, although people often pursue that. They look at certain aspects of fitness, they pick and choose without understanding what is not mentioned here, things like the immune system, the endocrine system, longevity in general, or overall well-being, perception of feeling good, RPE, rate of perceived exertion, actual heart rate as it responds to stress in general, not just from a fitness perspective, how we perceive stress in general. There are so many factors beyond just what we talk about here, so we have to understand that this is just one aspect of how we look at trying to achieve higher levels of health, but there's no question about it. If there's any one thing that we have significant control over to be able to assist our overall health and well-being, not just our fitness and athletic performance, it is specific aspects of exercise. We can play a great role in reducing stress and helping people live healthier lives by utilizing exercise in a safer, more efficient, more effective way. And that said, when we talk about health-related fitness, we want to make sure that the individuals we work with, teams or individuals, whoever we're working with, has baseline reasonable levels of these aspects of health-related fitness. Flexibility, the ability to achieve a general range of motion in a given joint, which means you're going to have a good basic understanding long-term of kinesiology, and actually more specifically joints as they're meant to move, let alone how they are specifically able to move for each individual we work with. So we have to understand then what we think is reasonable based upon the ideal and based upon who we're working with. And we really can't take that for granted and just assume, well, you can't really move your shoulder more than about 60% of its range, but we're going to go ahead and load that up really heavy. That doesn't make any sense at all. You're thinking more about this concept of producing force when the application of such levels of force, of high levels of force output for someone who has really, really poor range of motion due to some major dysfunction. If they're at 60% of range of motion, something has happened, whether they're significantly older and just can't move anymore that way because they haven't utilized full range of motion, or a specific injury or some genetic problem they have as to why they're having some joint problems. You don't want to be loading that up heavily. We have to make sure they have basic range of motion capability. Don't confuse mobility with flexibility. Overall movement control or motor control is much more complex than just the ability of a single joint or the compilation of all the joints all together to achieve a reasonable range of motion. Okay, but we do need to make sure they do have that reasonable ranges of motion. It's a simple fact also that a lot of athletes who perform at high levels of force output, for endurance-related athletes or power athletes, strength athletes, you name it, or bodybuilders who are trying to get very, very big, you don't necessarily have to be ultimate level flexibility to be able to be a strong, powerful, even elite athlete. However, we have to take it individually into account what's reasonable to expect. And that's the hard part that no one wants to hear the answer to. Everyone wants to know what's the exact we need to be able to get. Now, there's normal ranges, but there's no exact point. And obviously, certain things should be understood, and when we look back at our flexibility videos, we'll cover a few of those points there too. But if you can't get your arm to be straight up and down, even going pointing straight up in the air, without any load, why in the world would you load up someone in the frontal plane with a trying to do an overhead press there for the shoulder when they can't even get their shoulder fully straight up and down? That makes no sense at all. So we have to take that into account. There's an exact point you have to be able to get for ultimate overall well-being and health, but there are definitely guidelines or expectations based upon each joint for when and how you should load it, or when and how you should add stress to it. Okay. That said, Flexibility is an important thing we take as a component of everything we do, both maybe in the warm-up or in the cool-down, although reasonably I would suggest that you think about flexibility being an addition to the warm-up, an addition to the cool-down. It's really not part of warming up and cooling down itself. It's not. Moving, in general, is. Flexibility, because there are so many ways we can achieve better flexibility, is not necessarily part of the warm-up and cool-down process. It's in addition to those components. Muscular strength is the ability to produce force. You want somebody to produce more force? Most people would say, well, add more load. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Sometimes you have to work with the load you can handle right now for a long enough period to build up the joint connective tissue, to build up the overall control, motor control. If you can't move well, then we don't add more load. We don't add more higher intensity. We don't add more, try to be faster with the motion. You must move well first. Movement skill is king, or queen, if you will, before we start worrying about absolute muscular strength. Okay? Not necessarily worrying about 100% maximal force output unless you're talking about a power type athlete or strength type athlete. We start worrying about those kinds of things. If it's interesting to you or the individual you're working with, so be it. But generally speaking, we want to make sure that they have reasonable levels of muscular strength and force output. Muscular endurance, the ability to produce force over sustained periods of time. Whereas muscular strength, we often talk about 1 rep max or a few repetitions, and we'd rather you not talk about reps. That's right, we'd rather you not talk about reps. Be more concerned about the time duration for a given goal. And maximal force output, we're talking about 1 to 5, 10 seconds. Give or take. You can go a little longer than 10 seconds, but generally speaking, 1 to 10 seconds-ish. Rather than worrying about how many reps you did, you might want to worry about your ability to produce force with efficient movement skill, either quickly, more for power, or more for strength, just moving significant loads or applying significant force to a given action or motion for a short period of time. Now, strength we often refer to as going a lot longer than just 10 seconds, but that's maximal strength. Okay, that's maximal force output. Muscular endurance, well, it can be any duration of time, right? The greater your capacity to be able to handle longer durations of a given force production, or your ability to produce force for longer and longer and longer periods, or increasing force over time, over longer periods, whatever that time period might be, is more towards muscular endurance. Strength is really about the maximal force you can produce, whereas muscular endurance, or strength endurance, if you will, is your capacity to be able to handle force for longer and longer periods. And generally speaking, when we start someone out in any training program, we want to make sure they can handle forces at moderate levels, definitely below 70 to 80% force output, at least, maybe much less than that, for whatever they're capable of on a regular basis for longer periods, minutes at a time, probably. Minutes. Most people don't do that in the weight room. You should be. Okay, you should be in the very beginning phases of training if you want to really, really build the capacity to perform well long-term from the standpoint of having the capacity to be able to perform multiple sets and recover properly between, let alone preparing our connective tissue, preparing the joints to be able to handle higher levels of force in time, and eventually building towards maximal strength, which is not a beginning point. But we want to make sure they have basic components of strength before we move into components that we talk about next in skill-related fitness. Cardiovascular fitness is separate from this concept that we typically think of for actual maximal muscular strength or muscular endurance, being that you could have strong muscular endurance doing squats or knee extensions. The machine often refers to them as leg extensions, but knee extensions or calf raises, but you might not have the ability to walk for long periods without getting tired, or run for long periods, or swim for long periods, or cycle for long periods. Any given activity, you might not be able to handle at significant to moderate loads or levels of stress for longer periods. That's cardiovascular fitness. And I'm going to tell you flat out, it is the most important component for the general population. The most important component of overall fitness for exercise, from an exercise standpoint, is cardiovascular fitness. Because what we're really talking about is, it doesn't mean that cardio is the most important thing. Get on the treadmill. That's not what we're saying. Your ability to perform work for longer periods, to be able to perform work and have short rest periods and be able to handle that level of work, to be able to go throughout your entire day of work, not exercise, but work in an office setting or wherever that person might work and not get tired, to be able to wake up in the mornings and not be worn down, to be able to perform normal activities and come home at the end of the day and spend time with family and have energy to do so, to make dinner, to work, to clean up the house, to be able to work around the house and want to have a life outside of work and not to be tired all the time. We're talking about cardiovascular fitness affecting everything. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. There's too much emphasis these days on the end-all be-all being strength. Okay, there's no question about it. You having higher capacities of strength will help you. In fact, working on capacities of strength to some extent will help a little bit of your endurance. Likewise, working on aspects of your endurance will help a little bit of strength. There's a crossover here. It's all resistance training, okay? But at the end of the day, if we're talking about overall well-being and health, cardiovascular fitness is far more important than worrying about the maximal force output you can produce for general population, not talking about specific athletes with specific goals, okay? And that's something that takes time to build. Cardiovascular fitness is built over years. Okay, it takes several years to really achieve the maximal capabilities someone might have from a cardiovascular fitness standpoint. They can see significant gains in a very short period of time. You can actually lose 5 to 10% of your force capacity, whether we're talking about endurance or maximal force production, in just a couple, 2 or 3 weeks if you don't train on a regular basis, which is why I don't ever want to go through a period of time, if we can avoid it, of not training for 2 or 3 weeks, let alone a month or more. Someone takes months off, well, after about 3 months, you can lose 20, 25, 30% of your force production capacity that you could have had 3 months ago. Sometimes life happens, but the more we can avoid situations like that, the more we can actually maintain and improve from where we are versus always taking a big step back. Too often people take time away and don't think about the long-term ramifications of that. Life gets very stressful, things get in the way, whether we're talking about an athlete or just the general population, no question about it. You have bad days. You have a bad couple days. Don't have bad months if you can help it. Definitely don't have bad years, all right? And if you do, hey, it happened, it's over, get back to it. Good news is your muscular strength, your force output, you can, after working out for 3 to 6 months, you can gain back almost all of it. Assuming whatever force capacity you had 6 months ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, you can gain back almost all of it. Potentially, if you're training all the right ways, which is, regards to that, you have to be doing the right level of force output for the right duration, for the right number of days per week. All those factors, frequency, intensity, time, rest and recovery, all those things are important to be taken into account. But you can potentially gain those things back in 6 weeks for some individuals, maybe 8 weeks or so for most people with consistent program. 1.5 to 2 months, gain back what you lost that you'd gained for a long, long period. Because you once had it, the body can build it back to some extent where you once were. We're not talking about building beyond where you once were. That requires a whole different level. And anyone who knows, who has some experience with trying to gain from where you already are when you're already at a reasonably high level of achievement when it comes to strength or cardiovascular fitness or muscular endurance, any capacity of those aspects of physical fitness and well-being, it takes a lot more effort to make small changes once you've achieved a fairly high level. But once you've fallen off quite a bit, it's really not that hard to gain back what you'd lost. Gaining beyond that again is always going to be more of a challenge. Doesn't mean you can't be consistent. Didn't say it was easy. It's easier than you think. Okay. At cardiovascular fitness, though, we're talking about aerobic capacity, your VO2 max, your ability to maximally utilize oxygen for really, we're talking about periods of what's your effort level maximally. If you gave maximal effort over a 10 to 20 minute period, that would be, by the way, your aerobic capacity, the maximal amount of work you can do and maintain a given pace of or level of effort for 10 to 20 minutes. That's your VO2 max. Okay, that's where you're talking about your maximal capacity to handle aerobic level work. Okay, to be still working aerobically to some extent. That said, that building up that level, higher levels of that, we're talking about years to really maximize that. And actually, it's harder to gain back what you lost cardiovascularly than it is to gain back basic force production from a standpoint of muscular force production and hypertrophy. That's actually easier to get than the cardiovascular fitness. Okay, that said, body composition or body fat, we really want to have people being at reasonable levels of body fat, which means for men, we really want to see them be ideally, if we can, low 20s percentage-wise, and preferably even mid-teens is more ideal for the general population. Whereas women, we want to get them down at the very, very least in the low 30s, but really, really ideally getting them down like low mid-20s, and if we are more athletic, more towards the high teens, whereas the men are athletic-wise, low teens, And we all know, those of us who've been top athletes at one point or another, or competitive athletes, you may have seen your body fat for some males, maybe even some females, but hopefully not, but some males going into single-digit body fat, and maybe even low single-digit body fat. Women seeing low teens and maybe even single-digit body fat. Generally speaking, that's not really ideal for long-term well-being and health. However, it does happen in sport. That's why this is a different thing we're talking about here. We're talking about health. It's not really good for us to be that low body fat for sustained or longer periods because of the effect it can have, and often does have, with significant duration of time spent at those body fat levels on the endocrine system specifically, and wreaking havoc on the immune system as a response overall long-term as well. That said, sport and health are not necessarily the same. Body composition-wise, though, in general, a lot of times what happens in general fitness circles, we get so caught up in this, like you have to be a certain point. No, you don't. If someone has high body fat, but they're very flexible, good strength, good endurance, good cardiovascular fitness, but they have a body fat for a man that's maybe high teens, or for a woman that's maybe low mid-20s, it's really not the end of the world. Nothing bad's going to happen. There's always levels, and maybe someone wants to get lowered. That's fine. Please be very, very careful if you're a fitness professional watching these videos or wanting to be a fitness professional or a coach working with someone. Don't make body composition a primary goal. It's something that should happen as a consequence of working on proper flexibility, of working on proper strength, proper endurance, proper cardiovascular fitness. And of course, within that, other aspects of stress, trying to reduce your life stress, trying to improve your sleep quality and amount of sleep, and of course, improving your nutrition and your diet. Doing those things should improve body composition, not making body composition a goal in and of itself. People often walk into a gym, the general population, worried about their weight. The personal trainers often then get them worrying about their body fat. Technically, to make either one of those things your primary goal would, I'm going to be really bold here, be wrong. Okay, there's more to life than just weight or body fat. Ideally, we'd like to see them at reasonable levels for health and long-term longevity, for well-being, but they're not end-all be-all numbers by themselves at all. We want to make sure that it's reasonable, something that's we need to be discussing with the individual we're working with, and to be clear about goals. If you're going to maximize strength, you want to be maximally strong, maximal endurance, or maximal cardiovascular fitness, yeah, body composition is going to need to come down. But it should theoretically be coming down with the level of performance gains we're trying to seek if we're also working on our life stress, our sleep, and our nutrition as a whole, all of the above. Okay. That said, after a few weeks of work in the health-related fitness category, really what should be really ultimately a base level of probably bare minimum 4 weeks every year. Bare minimum 4 weeks spent on these basic concepts. Bare minimum maybe as much as 16 weeks, much as 4 months. Okay, before you start looking at doing this kind of stuff. Actually, some would even argue maybe even 5 or 6 months. We're looking at really a broad spectrum there. Depends very much on the individual, how they're performing right now. If they're already starting with high levels of flexibility, high levels of strength and or endurance or cardiovascular fitness and good body fat, maybe you don't spend as much time working on these things to see what we can do for maximization of the value of these things. The greatest danger that I think we see in people who are regular gym goers or regular exercisers, where athletes have been performing for longer periods, is they get stuck. They just work on just one aspect of the way they train and they never really change much from it. Or even worse, they just randomly change. Both are improper ways of looking at training. Both are ignoring that there are better ways of doing things and not random ways of doing things and not just staying the same. Okay. That said, skill-related fitness would be the next level. Agility, working on things that worry about trying to change direction quickly with control, whether it's forward to backward, laterally, up to down, or any combination thereof. Agility is not just lateral side slide type stuff, but literally any given direction, going one way and be able to reverse your direction quickly and change with control and do it fast. That's something that takes time. It takes a significant amount of motor skill, motor control, ability to move well as a whole. If you can't move well slow, you're not going to move well fast. If you don't have good basic level strength and mobility, you're not going to do well with agility. Okay, got to take small steps before you start worrying about that kind of thing. And the maximization of agility is very short periods of time. We don't do high levels of agility, asking someone to run through cones and do all sorts of crazy things for more than about 10-15 seconds, really. You often see it for more than 10-15 seconds. Okay, if that's a sport we're talking about, it's part of the sport. But if we're talking about overall well-being, wouldn't go more than 10, 15 seconds. If you're going to maximize agility and not get hurt and unnecessarily sprain ankles, tear calf muscles, and cause muscle strains and pains that just aren't necessary. Basic balance, your ability to maintain your position in space. It doesn't have to be on one leg. It doesn't have to be on two legs. It could be kneeling. It could be standing. It could be lying down. It could be seated. However we're talking about for a given position, we have to be thinking about any exercise we're seeking with anyone. There's got to be a reason why we're doing what we're doing. Why are you seated? Why are you standing? Why are you kneeling? Having a reason for doing it. And do not do it because it's tough. That's ridiculous. Cannot be more bold than that. Doing something because it's challenging doesn't make any sense from a standpoint of overall well-being. From a physiological perspective. From a psychological perspective, that's a totally different thing. I certainly have friends, I am not one of them, who loves to climb rocks, climb mountains, climb ridiculous faces of rock and stone, right? I have no desire to do such things. To say that that's something you need to do, that's absolutely not true. It's very challenging. It's something you want to do. Psychologically you have value there. You enjoy such things. There's nothing wrong with that. There's what we call ice cream exercises. I would refer to that as an ice cream exercise. You just love doing it. It's something that does it for you. Your life is more fulfilled because you like your ice cream. Right? I personally love to do push-ups and pull-ups and play basketball. On a day when my shoulders bothering me, doing push-ups makes no sense, but I like them, so I might do them anyway, even though it bothers my shoulder. That's why we call it an ice cream exercise. For us, in that moment, you're doing something you don't need to do, but you like to do it. There's a difference there. Finding that balance is finding the right position, the position at a given moment in time that makes the most sense, that you can maintain your position with good proprioception, with good motor control, motor skill, to benefit from the exercise. If you can't maintain your position in a given exercise, like whether you're standing on one leg or because you're just laying on a bench without the dumbbells throwing you off your balance and your leg comes off the ground, then we're imbalanced, or unbalanced if you will, and therefore that exercise is not appropriate for the way we're trying to perform it right now. It's not a bad exercise. Does not necessarily a good exercise. It's not appropriate for the person. Okay? Coordination, we kind of mentioned it already. You want to get higher levels of coordination. Movement skill, that takes time to develop. We're talking about months and years. Okay? You can see higher coordination levels in a few minutes' time. Okay? The kind of coordination is going to stay. It's going to be a newer level of coordination. So every time you start moving and doing something, you're at a newer level. That takes many weeks, if not months, and definitely years to see substantial differences that are going to be maintainable, if you will, that are more like your new baseline. Okay, but yes, with a high quality professional, with a knowledge of how to utilize the body, in a few minutes you can get someone moving better, no question about it. But it's not going to be sustainable, meaning the new normal, if you will, until they've had weeks and months, if not more, of training, working first at slower speeds for longer durations at lower loads before worrying about higher speeds, higher loads, or more shorter rest periods. Okay, we've got to make sure we get them plenty of time to progress. Speed itself is simply the ability to get from one point to another point quickly. Point A to point B, whatever that is. It's linear. Okay? Your ability to get from here to there, wherever there is in a straight line. That's speed. Speed doesn't require change of direction. It doesn't require significant loads. It's just, can I get from here to there quickly? From up to down, whatever you want to think about it. Okay? Typically think of it being like typical running. You're trying to get from one point to another. People often use the 40-yard dash as a primary gauge of speed because it's a very short duration. Most individuals in the world can complete it in less than 10 seconds, unless you're somebody who's got some serious challenges or significantly older, can't move as well anymore. Then certainly there are reasons why you probably wouldn't necessarily do a 40-yard dash. But it's a reasonable estimation of speed because it's a very short burst and a high recognition of anaerobic power, which is often used. But that said, speed typically starts something you can perform over very short periods, a few yards, 10, 15, 20 feet. How fast can you get from one point to another? You can do that in a group exercise room. You can do that in your backyard. How fast can you do that? And then when you start getting more speed developed there, you start lengthening the distance covered to see if you can be fast over greater distances. If speed, specific being fast, is the goal. Power, the ability to produce force over a short period of time, force times distance over time, whereas basically force, we're talking about mass times acceleration, so it's really mass times acceleration times distance over time. If you want to be more powerful, the most important factor, reduce the time you do it in. Be quicker with it. But you've got to first develop levels of coordination, basic balance. You got to be able to move fast in general before you start worrying about significant levels of force at short periods of time. Okay, and of course, our last point for this first segment of our program design presentation is reaction time. Your ability to react to external stimuli. Your ability to, if someone throws a ball at you, to quickly react and grab that ball. You're falling, to be able to stop yourself from falling. Those impromptu kind of moments to be able to respond well. If you don't have good flexibility, basic strength, good balance, good coordination, some agility in there, probably reasonable levels of power, you're going to have a harder time responding well to external stimuli when someone throws something at you, or you're risking a fall, or you have to grab something very fast to avoid yourself falling. Real life situations are often very much enhanced by improving these other parameters we're talking about. So when those moments come in real life, whether it's sport or just any situation in life, you fall down the stairs and you don't get hurt, because you can react well to external stimuli without thinking much about it. It's subconscious. It's an autonomic response because your body has been training physically appropriately for a long enough period. You can handle such unusual stresses when they occur. And of course, if the goal is more for sport, you need to engage these kinds of external stimuli on a more regular basis, making sure you're very much making sure that your sport, your training, when you train for that, is consistent with how you train in the gym or where you train. You throw a ball, a baseball, and it's not the same thing as you grabbing a cable on a machine and trying to throw 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds with a cable machine. It may look the same, the forces are totally different. When we get into the biomechanics video, if you're not sure what we're talking about here, you got to review biomechanics. Watch the biomechanics videos with Training Made Fun. We'll talk more specifically about how the forces are different, the loads are different, because the resistance is different, the direction of pull is different. The motions may look the same, they are by no means the same movement from a standpoint of what's going on externally, not just internally. Consequently, you're not doing yourself any favors by training that way. Right? You're not going to become a better kicker from a standpoint of being able to kick the ball farther if you don't already have the skill for it by just doing knee extensions. That's not going to work there, or hip extensions, any of that matter. It's not going to happen that way. It's much more specific to the motion itself. It won't be necessarily hurt by doing those things, but what's more significantly concerning is when you add load to running, you add load to throwing, natural actions that are used to your body weight. Why would you add more weight than your own body? If it changes the mechanics of how you move, and it will, then it's not going to enhance your performance, it's going to hinder it. Okay? Now, that's very individual. There's no question about it. There are some elite athletes who can handle some external forces that other people can't handle, but if it ultimately changes the mechanics of how you move, if you don't move as well, then no matter what it is you're trying to do here, you're not creating any improvement for the person long term without probably causing more risk than benefit. And that's what it all comes down to, isn't it? Benefit versus risk. If risk goes up, so be it, but benefit better go up higher than the risk does, or it makes no sense. That's a gamble. There are people who go to Las Vegas and who gamble significant amounts of money because they can afford to lose it. We can't always afford to lose the abilities we have by taking great risks, especially not with those people who are trusting us as the professionals, as the coaches, as the trainers, as those who are supposed to be helping them, by putting them under unnecessary risk that does not have a higher reward than the probability of that risk. We'll come back for section number 2 of program design shortly.